This set of episodes was streamed and recorded in between 2020 and 2021. It took me this long to upload them, partly because life happened and partly because I'm a slow video editor. Either way, I hope you enjoy this episode. If you don't, please send it to someone who will.
Am I audible? Do I sound like you can hear me clearly? Why can't you see me?
I can't see you too well, but I can hear you.
Wave your hand. Yes. I see you move. I see you move. It works. Nobody moved. Nobody moved from wherever they are. Everybody, all of you are in the right place.
This is take 34 of Stories with Shastri, and we have Keanu Heydari, who is our guest today. Keanu is a historian of 19th and 20th century European French cultural, intellectual, and migration history. His research focuses on the out-migration of Iranians, and especially intellectual and cultural leaders from Tehran to Paris before and after the 1953 coup d'etat. Keanu is also interested in questions of culture, spirituality, and religious belonging in the contemporary world. And I hope you enjoy this episode because I really enjoy talking to him, and there's always so much to learn. Hello.
Hello.
Can you? I know enough about you, but could you tell our listeners a little more about yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name is Keanu Heydari. I've just finished my third year at the PhD program in history at the University of Michigan, and I will be starting my fourth year in the fall. I study 19th and 20th century France, and my dissertation looks at Iranian immigration between Tehran and Paris.
Okay, and when we were discussing, what we can talk about, one of the things that we zeroed in on is the conversation of conscience and consciousness, right? So I want to start with, so that we don't have any doubts about it later on, to understand what your definition of conscience is. What is it of consciousness, religion, spirituality, and faith?
When it comes to conscience, I would say conscience is the spirit that dwells within every single human being. It's the moral compass with which human beings are enabled to make moral judgments and evaluations. And I think that spirit is shared among all human beings. Consciousness, I think, refers to the spirit of connectivity between each and every single human being, where we are enabled to reach out and ascend to a higher plane of consciousness, a higher plane of moral reasoning, a higher plane of cognitive capacity. We transcend the barriers that limit us and cause us to engage in things like prejudice and discrimination and hatred and border building. Consciousness and consciousness raising refers to that transcendent act of reaching beyond and achieving another plane of consciousness.
Right, and what about religion, spirituality, and faith?
I think religion refers to an institutional form of the expression of faith in some higher power. Spirituality is more complicated because I think spirituality refers to practices, mentalities, modes of being that are adjacent to the institutional religious form of engaging with the divine, with the transcendent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and how do we know that, we're the only beings with a conscience, or, with the ability to think? Because that's something I think about a lot.
I think a lot of research has shown us that there are other sentient beings, there are whales, there are chimpanzees, monkeys, that have quasi or pseudo-religious rituals, right? Mm-hmm. But I think once we think about it deeply, human beings have a unique capacity, a unique gift of language and linguistic expression. Human beings are uniquely endowed with an ability to use sign systems to create meaning. A lot of French theorists, for example, Ferdinand de Saussure, Jacques Lacan, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, are all indebted to what we call the linguistic turn, meaning viewing human beings as uniquely given with a capacious ability to use language and sign systems to communicate with each other. And I think this linguistic gift, what someone like Steven Pinker, for example, would call, the language animal, the language instinct that humans have, it sets us apart from other species.
Does it also come from a place of realizing that there is a lot that we don't know, and do you think we find comfort in that?
I think that's an excellent question. I think something that you and I spoke about earlier was the question that a lot of folks who are opposed to religion and religious institutions often come from the perspective that it shuts down the asking of questions. But the funny thing is, religions were, I don't know if you want to call it discovered, invented, produced, mutually co-created, whatever you want to say. That happened because people were asking questions in the first place. Right. And I think that drive to ask questions is fundamentally part of the religious experience.
Okay. So, and for context to those watching and listening, we would moderating a room on whether religion and atheism can coexist. And something I think about is that an atheist more often than not would say that, oh, I believe in science, right? I may not necessarily believe in the concept of religion or a higher power or a superior being or any of that. So do you think religion is in any way scientific? Because I ask this because an atheist identifies as an atheist because a theist exists, and a theist identifies as a theist.
The question about the scientific basis of religion is difficult. I think the way I think about it, I really borrow heavily from Karl Barth, who's a 20th century German Protestant theologian. He has two different words that describe what we would in English simply call history. One of them is Geschichte, the German word for history, and the other word is histoire, the French word for history. Now, I often get the two mixed up, but regardless of which is which, one of them refers to the simple, plain, general, boring anthropological history of the world. Like the planets crashing into other planets, and the lava coming out of the ground and forming, the terrestrial sphere of Earth. The other, which I think is Geschichte, refers to a story. It refers to the story of faith, the story of legend, of myth, something that we need to tap into so that we can access a broader plane of cognition, a broader plane of thought. And I think I often differentiate between Geschichte and Histoire, if only for the sake of saying that those historical accounts of seeing and knowing require us to put on different kinds of hats. To study Histoire, we have to put on secular thinking caps that allow us to see chains of causality in a purely material lens. But when we're thinking about Geschichte, there's something more transcendent, there's something bigger in mind that we're thinking of, something that implicates our morals, that implicates our ethical responsibilities. And I think that is inherently connected to the fact that human beings are storytelling animals.
Right. And, drawing from that, I personally believe that a lot of what we know about religion or conscience or consciousness comes from storytelling, essentially, right? And also history, or what one would consider history. So you did, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned something about talking about, I think, Hegel's concept of world history. So can you tell me a little more about that?
Yes. So Hegel talks about Weltgeist, or world spirit. And I think the problem with that is that there are several interpretations of Hegel that interpret in wildly different ways. For me, my interpretation of Weltgeist is deeply connected to the Christian concept of the Holy Spirit, which is that, and you can find this in the work of Catholic theologians like Pierre de Chardin, which he talks about the concept of the omega point. And how do I connect omega point to Weltgeist or world spirit? Basically, the spirit of God, the spirit of the divine, the transcendent, inundates and saturates the earth. And the history of the world for Chardin is a history of progress. It's a history not of progress in the way that we think about it in terms of secular liberal enlightenment thought. It's a history of movement. We're moving from one point to another point. And what point is that? That point is the omega point. The omega point for Chardin is simply the point at which we reach what he calls Christ consciousness. The point where we reach a unification, a divine unity of our thoughts, of our cognition, of our modes of being with the cognition and modes of being of God himself. And that will be a moment of profound cosmic liberation when our consciousness building efforts reach the realm of the divine and the transcendent. How we get there is another question. How we arrive at that point is a completely different question. I don't think I'm well equipped to answer that, but I do have some suggestions.
Right. One of the books you're reading speaks about the concept of cosmic Christ, right? So could we, and I, when I was doing my research, I came across a few things, and everything you say is pointing to different questions I have. So I'm trying to pick which one to go with. However, I want to start with what is the concept, or what, I don't even know if I should call it concept, but how do you define cosmic Christ?
I think when you look at Richard Rohr, who talks about this idea of the cosmic Christ, the idea really is that there are two revelations of God. One of them in the unique acts of God's self-disclosure to humanity across all the different peoples and across all the world religions. But then you have the actual creation of the earth itself. Whether we say it's a Big Bang or something else that happened, there are different theories in physics and quantum mechanics about how exactly the universe was created, or is it an endless loop? I don't know. I'm not an expert on this stuff, right? But the idea is that God himself, or God themselves, really revealed God's self in the creation of the cosmos. And this made Christ consciousness available to all people just by virtue of being in the world.
Right.
Being in the world made the consciousness of the divine reason available to all human beings. And for me, I link that towards the advent of human language itself. So when human beings were able to communicate linguistically, that's when we were endowed with the divine logos, the divine reason, the divine sense of transcendence. When we were able to use language for the first time to communicate with one another, at that point, we connect into something magical and beyond purely human abilities and capacities. Language is a gift that we often underestimate.
And every time we talk about how we first started communicating through language, my mind always goes back to the story of the Tower of Babel. And it's interesting. I want to, I do want to get to the bit about consciousness and whether or not it is individualistic or collective. However, I also want to understand. So a lot of times people use religion and spirituality interchangeably, right? So do you think they're synonymous? And if so, why, or if not, why?
That's an excellent question. I don't think they're synonymous. I think spirituality is it could be collective. Spirituality could certainly be collective. I think it could be an individual or collective endeavor to reach out towards the divine, to reach out towards the transcendent. It is a way of cognizing, of orienting your physical body towards something greater than yourself. What I think religion is, it is a hierarchalization, if you will. It is an institutionalization of a codified set of spiritual practices across many, many centuries and many, many years. Faith, on the other hand, is a sure belief, a sure confidence that these spiritual practices are legitimate. These religious practices, these spiritual practices allow us to legitimately access the divine realm.
So how I see religion is that it is a set of, a lot of religions are defined by a set of traditions, a set of beliefs that stem from somewhere or the other. Rituals, things that you've been doing for years and years and years. And I'm sure there's a good reason for that, right? On a similar, could you actually give me an analogy of something similar when you're trying to define spirituality?
If we're talking about religion as the codification of spiritual practices, I would say spirituality itself is the list of those practices themselves. It is the way in which people, like I mentioned earlier, it is the way in which people connect and plug into the transcendent, the supernatural. It is a way that people access a realm of, you could almost call it divine community, where they reach out beyond the limited confines of themselves through the very use of their bodies into a greater realm of communication, into a greater realm of access.
Okay, and what do you think is, do you think religion and spirituality have a place in today's day and age? And do you think that are they relevant?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think so much of our daily life today is religious. What do I mean by that? I guess some theologians and some critical theorists have argued that the very act of going to the supermarket is a religious ritual, right? The question of what is and what isn't a religious ritual has been plaguing theorists of religion since the 1960s and 1970s. And I think once we start thinking about the definition of what a religion is, Durkheim says something to the effect of it's theories about sacred things, right? I think what we end up seeing is that much more than what we anticipate is deeply shrouded in a religious garb. National anthems, flags, soldiers dying for their country. All of this is enmeshed within a greater religious context. Now, the context is not necessarily divine religion. It could be national religion. Patriotism is certainly religious, has religious aspects to it. So I think once we get to the bottom of how much our daily existence is actually religious adjacent or religious like, we start to see that we haven't really been disenchanted. We haven't really been secularized or turned into this atheist society in the way that some people would like to believe. There are still billions of religious people in the world, and those who identify as nuns, as N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, those who identify as as not belonging to a specific religion, often themselves have some sort of spiritual practice. Now, when people tell me, what spiritual practice? Using crystals? That's not legitimate. And more often than not, it's conservative people who say things like that to me, right? That using crystals is not a legitimate use of spirituality. I would say two things to that. One, who are you to judge what is legitimate and what isn't legitimate spirituality? And two, I would say, what about the very act of ritual processes? I know, Sangamitra, you were telling me about, getting up in the morning every day and doing something. drinking a cup of coffee, stretching. Who's to say that these aren't religious in some way? Eastern religions, South Asian religions have a very, very unique place for the physicality of our bodies. And the physicality of our bodies is something that I think needs to be brought back to Western religious experience. But the very act of going out for drinks with your friends can be religious. If we do in fact believe in these concepts of the omega point and Christ consciousness, which I know for many of your listeners are going to be a stretch to believe in. Granted, I know you don't have to convince me about that. But if we do believe that God or the divine has saturated the entire planet, why would getting a drink with a friend not be a religious experience? Why would the presence of the divine, the presence of God, not be everywhere around us? And I think having a perspective that says the presence of the divine is everywhere really sets up a different way of engaging with other people. It sets up a different way of what it means to value and respect human life, what it means to value our environment, our climate, what it means to value respect for traditions of liberal democracy even.
Right. And do you think religion is political?
Everything is political.
Correct answer. Okay. Moving on. When we speak of religion, I was listening to this podcast that you'd sent me, which you were on earlier. And I wanted to understand that and where you stand on this. When we speak of religion in particular, do you think it's an active process when it comes to moving past the binary? So when I say binary, I'm talking about good and evil, right? Day and night. So what do you think about that?
Something I mentioned on that podcast was the propensity, the tendency of many, many people in the Judeo-Christian tradition, even broader the Abrahamic religion, to subscribe to what we would call Manichaean distinctions. And Manichaeanism is simply this idea of black and white, day and night, that there's good and there's evil. My perspective comes from what we would call the apocalyptic school of New Testament studies. And you don't have to get nervous. Apocalyptic is not this, what's his name? That actor who was in the Left Behind film. Is it Jack Nicholson? Not Jack Nicholson. It's
I think you mentioned Nicolas Cage in that podcast.
Nicolas Cage, right? It's not this. It's not this Nicolas Cage story of God coming down and destroying everything and creating this cosmic war between this and that, right? What's going on?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I thought I was listening to it and I thought, what did Nicolas Cage do to Keanu? Sorry.
No, it's he was in that Left Behind film, right? Which is this really, really unfortunately bad reading of the last book of the New Testament, Revelation. And what's wrong with that reading is that it reads it as if it's something that's going to happen, as opposed to a coded letter written by John of Patmos in the first century, towards the end of the first century AD, where he was basically writing a note to the churches of Asia Minor, which is currently in Turkey. And he was telling them how to survive persecution at the hands of the Roman state. Only towards the very end of the book, of the letter, do we receive some glimpse of what the future might look like. And the future is beautiful. It is a reconciliation of the divine, the heavens, with the earth. It is Christ consciousness arriving and garbing the entire planet, where the realms of the heavens and the realms of the earth merge together in an explosion of divine goodness. Revelation says towards the end, every tear will be wiped away. And this is a hope. This is the New Testament hope of the reconciliation of God, of the divine, with human beings. And the assumption that that entails is that there is a separation between us and God. That separation doesn't have to be there anymore. And that's the story of what Christ did. Now, many other religious traditions have paths to reconciliation. For certain segments of Hinduism, devotion to, let's say, Krishna. Devotion to Krishna will allow you to change the very fabric of your mind,
Right.
to change the atomic molecular structure of your consciousness, so that you will be able to more fully forget yourself and enter into the love of the divine. Christianity has a similar story, where by entering into Christ, this is what Kazaman, the New Testament theologian, says. It's not a story of God canceling out debts and forgiving sins first and foremost. First and foremost, it's a story of being in God himself, being in Christ, being in the consciousness of Christ. The fundamental thing that I'm realizing as I read more and more is that fundamentalists, hardliners, want to make this a story of why humans are bad and why God is good. For me, it's not a story of why humans are bad. It's a story of why we are in such a predicament that we're in. Why there is so much evil, why there is so much hatred, why there is so much natural destruction. For me, the apocalyptic story is mysterious. In the book of Genesis, we hear a story of Satan tempting Eve. But how did Satan get there? How did the serpent get there? It's a mystery.
Thought about it.
It's a mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would like to say, with some of the early church fathers and mothers, that it's not the fault of Eve, it's not the fault of Adam. They were tricked. A force beyond human understanding entered into the cosmos and brought destruction and evil. This is a story we find across, it's a perennial story. We find across so many traditions that sadness and destruction came to the world through some mystery. And now the only story that will help us is reconciliation with the divine.
Yeah.
And so that's my spark note. That's my fundamental takeaway. That for me, it's not about sins necessarily. It's not about individual human activity. It's about sin as a structure.
Okay.
Evil as a structure. That a reconciliation with God is the antidote to.
Right. So, do you think how we perceive God, right? Gods, depending on what you follow. Do you think the act of even reconciliation, like you said, do you think it's self-gratifying in a lot of ways? Simply because there's a lot of people around us, right, who think that, okay, if I do this, these are the good things that happen to me, right? This will happen. I will attain this. I will get this. And then, or if I don't do it, this is what will happen, which would be the case of in sin. So do you think, and also if it does end up happening, saying that, something as simple as a little child saying that, okay, let me pass my exams and I'll do this for you. Right, or let me pass my exams or something like that, because I, as a child, Santa Claus is no god, but I was trying to, figure out whether Santa exists, because my little brother came up to me and said, oh, Santa doesn't exist, our parents are just playing a number on us. And I was very upset. So I actually sat and it was my mom who would, I would go to the balcony and sit and pray to Santa, saying, I want this, and I want this. And my grandfather, I didn't know, was listening to me. And he would go and call my mom, and before she'd come back from work, she'd pick up something. Right? And she'd pick up that thing. But what she didn't know was that particular year, I wrote a letter to Santa saying, if you exist, just put a dot on the paper, and that's it. And then I woke up, and that's how it happened. So do you think but then when things do happen, right? I feel like it affirms our belief and reaffirms that, okay, this happens, this exists, this is there. So do you think it's self-gratifying?
I think in many cases, it is definitely self-gratifying. It's not altruistic. Here's how I would frame it, perhaps in two different ways. One, people often treat God or gods like cosmic vending machines. You press a certain sequence of buttons, and then you receive some candy, right?
Right.
But let me ask you this question. If you have a partner, do you treat your partner like a vending machine, or do you have an actual relationship with that partner? I think the way we need to conceive our relationships with divinity or divinities is within the context of relationships. We have to have communion and community with the divine. Whether that means going out into nature, whether that means prayer, private meditation, whatever it means to you, you need to cultivate that habit. Otherwise, what we see is treating the supernatural, treating the divine as if it owes us something. God doesn't owe us anything. And I think once we come to that conclusion and realize we are entreating God, there comes a moment of gratefulness for what we already have. There comes a moment of gratefulness for the gifts that have already been given to us. And I think one of the evangelical acronyms you hear all the time is ACTS: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. And I think once we do all those activities, we adore the divine, celebrate the divine. We confess our sins to the divine and ask for forgiveness. And I also think especially that means forgiving one another and asking for forgiveness from one another. That's such a habit that's been not cultivated in the West. That we don't ask each other for forgiveness in a way that's meaningful anymore. You know what we say, Sangamitra, today? We say, I'm sorry if I offended you. No. I am sorry for offending you. That's not the point of confession. We need to reconcile our broken relationships with other people. What's the third thing? Adoration, confession, thanksgiving. We have to be thankful for the gifts that have been given to us. And I think I am preaching to myself more than anybody else, because I am a cynic, I am a sarcastic person, and I am never grateful enough for the gifts that have already been given to me.
Self-aware.
And then what's the last one? Supplication.
Yes.
See, this is what people think religion is. And this is not what religion is. Religion is not just asking God to let you pass your exam, to let you do things in general. Supplication is only a fourth of the story. Right? I think once we see the conversation going in the direction of communion with the divine, that to me is something very different. It's very unique. It's very special.
Right. So when we speak of the divine, right, and even I'm still at the reconciliation thing and saying that you exist within the supernatural or the supreme. But then when you say that, you're inherently saying that this person is more than, right, in some way or the other. This person, this entity, this idea, this feeling. Why do you, it's a two-part question. One is, do you think faith in this, in all of these people or ideas or things, do you think this faith exists within or outside ourselves? And, is it tangible? What is its objective? And also, I want to understand, why do you think we place our faith in someone outside of ourselves?
To me, this idea of faith outside ourselves is very important. This is the whole basis of apocalyptic. Apocalyptic it means revealed, revelation. And what has been revealed to us? The presence of God in the world has been revealed to us.
Right.
We could not have, this is my firm belief, we could not have reached this on our own. There is something else, someone else, some others outside of us that make us aware of a reality that transcends us. This is the faith in something supernatural. And granted, many of your listeners are going to balk at this and say, no, we agree with Feuerbach, we agree with Marx, that religion is simply the expression of the wishes of man. It's simply the expression of the wishes of human beings. It's wish projection, it's fantasy. The contention of Apocalyptic is that human beings wouldn't have created this stuff without some kind of engagement with the divine. Now, here's where it gets a little complicated. I fundamentally also do believe there is something within each of us that pushes us to search for the divine. Here's my contention. That thing within us that lets us search for the divine, shockingly, we found it. We found the divine.
Where?
In spiritual practices, in religious communities, in codes of ethics and laws, in ways of structuring society that lead towards the Hebrew word shalom, or flourishing.
No.
When societies flourish, they are in communion with the divine. When they don't flourish, they are violating the very principles of humanity. And the very principles of humanity are networked to the divine. This is what I disagree with. I disagree with people saying human beings are nothing, they're evil worms, they deserve nothing but hell and wrath and torment, and it's only by the grace of God that we have anything, right? No. We are made as children of the divine. We, in the Christian tradition and in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we say we are made in the image of God. I think there's something to that idea. We are made in the image of the divine, that the divine chose the human race as a vehicle to bring grace, forgiveness, mercy, and love to cultivate the entire world. Here's an idea for you. Let's go with the fable of the book of Genesis in terms of the first 3 chapters.
Okay.
What would have happened if Adam and Eve had not been tempted by the devil or by the serpent?
Ignorance.
You think they would have lived in ignorance?
In ignorance of what is the other than whatever they were told. Yes. They wouldn't have asked questions.
That's very interesting. I think I have a more optimistic spin on it perhaps than you. I think if they had never eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the knowledge of angels, they would have cultivated the entire world and turned the entire world into a garden.
Interesting.
So Adam is a primordial priest and Eve is a primordial priestess. They are cultivating the ziggurat, the Mesopotamian temple to God. They are cultivating the garden of spirituality. And the goal of shalom, the goal of world peace, is bringing that garden to the entire world. Now, what is the point of this analogy for you? The plan was thwarted by the emergence of sin as a cosmic force. Sin is not what you do, the naughty things you do behind closed doors. God doesn't care about that. It is a force of structural evil that makes us participate in systems that dispossess indigenous land, that participate in colonialism and imperialism, that push the carceral state, that make us incarcerate, in the United States at least, the largest percentage of the population compared to any other country. It makes us support policing institutions that indiscriminately kill people of color. It makes us support systems of greed, maliciousness, and evil that create health disparities, income disparities. This is what sin is. Sin is a structural force. And the more we participate in it, the more it yields its rotten fruit. My contention is participation in the divine is one of the, not the only, but it's one of the antidotes to help us outside, to help us escape the suffocating structures of sin. Once we participate in the logic of the divine mind, we start to see, oh, there are expectations of me and my behavior. I can't stay silent when injustice is being perpetuated.
Right. So, but wait, if you think they will go and cultivate a garden to the rest of the world, what was happening in the rest of the world while they were in Eden?
That's a great question. I think the symbolism of the story would suggest that the rest of the world was empty. There were just plants and animals.
Isn't that essentially a garden?
It wasn't cultivated by human reason and human order.
I'm messing with you.
Okay.
But you know, coming back to how you say that there's something within us, right? That creates this, I don't know if it's need or this, you know, the motivation to look for, you know, to search for the divine or be one with the divine. Do you think that comes from a place of greed? Because, you know, if you're looking at it from the view of someone who's, you know, living at a time where the wheel wasn't even invented, right? So you have food, you have shelter, and all, you know, all your primal necessities taking care of you. But then you wanted more, right? And then you kept wanting more. You wanted more. You wanted a wheel so that you didn't have to walk for so long. You wanted, and then you saw fire. You got scared of it. You worked towards it, right? But fire is a different thing. But then, and you kept wanting more out of yourself, out of those around you. So do you think that need to, you know, and this is the point where I would call it a need, right? That if there's something within you to look for the divine and you're looking for it outside, is it because you want more? Is it coming from a place of greed rather than finding it within yourself?
I don't think it's a either or. I wouldn't say it's coming from a place of greed, actually. I would say it's coming from a place of necessity. Human beings have an internally motivated desire to explore the transcendent, because we are not satisfied with the mundane, the banal. Even though God is in the mundane and the banal, we want to reach out to God themselves and say, hello, what's my purpose for being here? That's why we have so many stories of how we've been created, so many stories of what our purpose here on earth is. Whether you have the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh with Enkidu, that our story is that, you know, we were made slaves of God, and or rather, we're made in the image of God themselves. Regardless of the story, we've always tried to figure out why we're here and what our purpose is. And I think that comes from the very virtue of the fact that we are language animals, that we create narratives, we create stories. We create stories like this.
Right.
We need to structure the understanding of our reality through the narrative, through a story. And I don't think that necessarily coalesces with the idea of being greedy. Granted, it's not that human beings are reaching out for the divine for purely altruistic reasons. It could certainly be out of selfishness as well. That's the idea of the cosmic vending machine that I was telling you about earlier.
Yeah, that's my trailer. But you know, but then you said that is because we're not satisfied. But doesn't greed stem from the fact that you're not satisfied with what you already have?
I think greed does stem from that, as long as you are already in a position of completeness. If you're in a position of completeness, and you know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's basically a triangle that says at the bottom of it is your physiological needs, and then psychological needs, and then, you know, spiritual, whatever needs. If you have already met all of your fundamental needs, then yes, it is out of a position of greed to say, let me search for something else. But I would actually change several of the things on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I would put spiritual things and spiritual foundations on the bottom. Why would I do that? One of my favorite anthropologists, his name is Ian Hodder, Hodder. He has a book called The Leopard's Tale. And in it, he talks about the Turkish village of Çatalhöyük. In it, he found that people were burying their dead underneath their homes, and had these rock formations that they would celebrate these religious rituals around. They were semi-nomadic pastoralists. And this completely flies in the face of Karl Marx's theory that people were agriculturally based and agriculturally landed, only at that point they developed religion. These semi-nomadic pastoralists, 6,000-7,000 years ago, God knows how long, were recognizing and celebrating their dead. Why would people who are not agriculturalists celebrate their dead, have religious rituals around their dead? It means there is something very ancient, very old about human connection with the divine and the transcendent. It is not a product of landed people who are completely comfortable, who have everything and all their boxes checked, who then invent an oppressive religious hierarchy and oppressive religious structure to, colonize and dominate women and to create hierarchies of difference. It's an innate human capacity to view the transcendent as something that is essential, central to what it means to be a human being. It's the oldest thing we've done, to celebrate the dead, to have religious rituals that celebrate the passing of the seasons. This is part of who we are as people.
Right. So, one of the reasons I asked whether do you think we find comfort in the unknown, or why we place our faith in someone else or give them that power that, we can also have and we can also reclaim for ourselves, or maybe not for ourselves. I feel like that's unselfish. But I was having this conversation with a friend. I don't remember the specifics. In fact, right before this call, I tried to send her a voice note and say, can you please send me the notes on this conversation, because she writes things. But from what little I remember of it, we were talking about why do we, why does God exist, or the idea of something supernatural or something divine or something transcendent. And it was about 4 a.m, and we were pulling an all-nighter together, obviously. But we were thinking, so something I had said on the lines was, since the beginning of time, the first thing we were scared of was the night, right? Then the second thing became fire. Fire was scary. You just look at it and you were like, what the hell is that? Little did we know that fire could actually help us with that fear of the night, right? I'm sure there was some point where we didn't realize that. And we all at every point had our eureka moment. But so I feel like I looked at it in a way where at that moment, I looked at it in a way where I said that you were afraid of something you didn't know. So you sat hoping that whatever little you know, there is something else that helps you, right? And some people didn't do that. Maybe they didn't. We don't know. We weren't there, or maybe we were. Who knows? Anyway, going. Not. I don't want to go into a thought loop, but essentially, that you have the power within you. You know it, and you're choosing to give it to someone else. That someone else can be a person sitting next to you. It can be a person. It can be a mentor. It can be who you consider divine, right? Who you consider to have that power or the ability to be able to, just comfort you in some way. Which is also why I probably ask whether it comes out of a place of greed, right? And also, And also the comfort question of whether or not we find comfort in the fact that there is a lot we don't know and someone's taking care of it, right? Whether it's, again, the same set of people. So I want to, also understand that, and that's why I said that, okay, we place, and that's something about me, is that I always say that if I'm giving you the power to something, I can reclaim it whenever I want, right? And I have that right, which I will exercise if required. However, coming back to purpose, right? The biggest reason, we're having this dialogue is because we're capable of thought. Before communication, before languages, right? You are processing what I'm saying, I'm processing what you're saying. But then where does the thought go once you and I cease to exist? And what is the purpose of this conversation then? Because irrespective of whether or not this particular episode would be out, right? Who's to say that it will exist forever? Sure, you say that everything you put on the internet exists forever, and I know that. But what happens to that thought? And there's so many that we are constantly addressing, acknowledging over time. So what happens to that thought when you and I cease to exist?
I think everything exists in the mind of God.
Okay.
I don't think anything will be lost. One of the visions that Karl Barth had of the afterlife was, again, it's not my favorite vision of the afterlife, to be completely honest with you, but he said, eternity is a eternal redemption of our memories. So all the bad that happened in our memories will be redeemed and resurrected. Time will not continue anymore. But in the afterlife, our memories will be redeemed and resurrected. I don't believe that per se. I believe that time will continue, and that we will live on Earth in a resurrected heaven, merged with Earth itself. That the divine realm merges with the human realm, and we reach this omega point of consciousness where we see things as they really are. And in that sense, like I mentioned before, every tear will be wiped away and all things will be rectified, made right. That's my vision of the afterlife. Granted, my vision of life and death is not beholden to the fantasies of 14th century medieval theologians, right? I don't believe in this Dante's Inferno, Paradiso nonsense, right? I think, for me, the ultimate hope is the arrival of God in the cosmos again. Is God entering the universe again in some apocalyptic, dramatic way? And what happens when we die is not particularly important to me, because I am not the only part of the story. It's you as well. It's everyone listening to this. All of us together will be reconciled and redeemed in the mind of God. And it's my personal belief that we will all be given new bodies with which we can build a future cosmos, a future world together. This is a Christian belief. But if it doesn't happen that way, I won't complain. It's whatever God chooses to do. Whatever the mind of the divine chooses to do. This is my tradition, my background of how I explain the future, right? But I think so many fundamentalists and evangelicals have harped endlessly about going to heaven, going to hell, when if you look at the earliest manuscripts of the church fathers and mothers, they weren't concerned about going to heaven and going to hell. They were concerned about the arrival of God on the earth, making all things new, restoring the broken, healing the sick, bringing justice to the oppressed. That moment of reconciliation is the moment of the arrival of God. That this is what they were ultimately concerned with. So it's not about what happens to me when I die, what happens to you when I die. It's about what happens when God comes back. and rectifies everything, makes all things new. That's the concern of the early church fathers and mothers. And I think you find that what the propensity of Western people to do is to take a otherwise collectivistic Eastern religion and turn it individual. So what are people in the West obsessed with talking about? Reincarnation. That's an arguably small piece of the puzzle, right? What about cosmic participation in the mind of Krishna? What about cosmic participation in the mind of the gods? How do we participate in that logic? How do we build better religious communities? How do we learn to deal with suffering? People in the West always want to get to what is the implication for me? And I think this individualistic streak is dangerous. Why are you so concerned about yourself? What about your neighbor? What about the world? What about the environment that is being destroyed so quickly? We're just seeing one of the worst heat waves in the West Coast that we've ever seen of the United States. So I think we can learn a lot from more collectivistic traditions.
Right. But, speaking of restoration and even the idea of reincarnation and Eastern religions, something you had said that it was about, connecting with the divine, being one with the divine. But a lot of traditions also say we are the divine, right? So I don't remember what that story was that you had shared with me when I told you that it reminded me, and even right now when you said the whole everything will be rectified and everything will be and tears will be wiped away, when I mentioned about how there is something called the Satya Yuga in Hinduism, right, where everything is meant to be the age of truth. So I think that's very interesting. But so a part of my research when it came to what I would ask you, it was very panic induced because I procrastinated it for a very long time. But something very interesting that I found was this quote on a book that our common acquaintance shared with us. It says on birth and death, right? So and I think it's quite relevant here because you speak of how celebrating the dead or paying offering respects to the dead has been an age-old practice since way before. And I'm going to read it out. It's from the Buddha's 12-fold concatenation of cause and effect, right? It says, on ignorance depends karma, on karma depends consciousness. Apparently, so now according to, I actually looked this up and I came across this paper on dependent origination from Princeton University, which says that these apply to the past life. Now, the following, until I say otherwise, they say that it applies to this person says that it applies to the present life, which is, I'm going to read it again from the start. On ignorance depends karma, on karma depends consciousness, on consciousness depends name and form. On name and form depend the 5 organs of sense. On the 5 organs of sense depends contact. On contact depends sensation. On sensation depends desire. On desire depends, sorry, I'm trying to go through both of them. On desire depends attachment. On attachment depends existence. On existence depends birth. On birth depend old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, grief, and despair. Right. So the part about on attachment depends existence onwards is what they say applies to the next life. And this particular list says that this scheme must be interpreted cyclically and not linearly. And towards the end in this paper, and in contrast to what I read earlier, it says, thus does this entire aggregation of misery arise. So what do you think about it?
I think there's a real sense in which we we see the cyclical nature of human life and death and suffering. The book of Ecclesiastes in the Hebrew Bible, or in the Christian tradition we call it the Old Testament, says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, life is but a breath of air. Right. And I think there's a real acknowledgement of the fundamental brokenness of the world. That I will say there is a difference between Buddhism and Abrahamic religions.
Yes.
What is that difference? Buddhism would say that reality is an illusion, that suffering is something that that we must escape by detachment. In Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity, suffering is actually the vehicle through which we are redeemed.
By embracing it?
By embracing it. Because one of the things that St. Paul said is, by virtue of our suffering, we are united to Christ on the cross. And no amount of meditation or prayer can change the material reality of the world around us. Granted, I do believe that what we imagine and what we manifest can become our reality very easily. But sometimes that's not in the cards. Sometimes the suffering we face has to be embraced. And the suffering that we experience is not necessarily caused by our attachments to the world. It's caused by exigencies, by contingencies, by external circumstances. And so I think in the Abrahamic religions, the materiality of the world is emphasized. The fact that the experience around us is real. And that the sufferings we go through are part and parcel of what it means to be a human being in this world that is ridden and rife with sin and evil. But I think transcendence with the divine is the vehicle through which we begin making sense of these broader questions. What I like about some of the Eastern traditions is that it recognizes that suffering itself is a problem that has to be resolved.
But doesn't Buddhism, right, you said that about Eastern traditions, sorry.
Yes.
Yes. So, okay, so since we're talking about, whether or not reality is an illusion or not, or whether about attachment, detachment, life, death, or actually birth, death. The other day I told someone that, I don't remember what I said, but I said, right, it was a conversation on the difference between a wedding and a marriage. Right. So the analogy I came up with is, I define it as wedding being the ceremony and marriage being what happens after that, and whether it's a marriage anniversary or a wedding anniversary. And the analogy I came up with is that you call the day you were born was your birthday, but what happens after that is life. Right. So coming back to this, do you think a way of achieving this idea of the ultimate reality or ultimate truth or ultimate or even to be one with the divine, or to transcend into what is your sense of higher consciousness, as some would say, do you think that it comes from accepting that all of these things are dual in nature, or do you think they are one in nature? So
this is the problem of This is the problem of the one and the many. I lean towards This is such a hard question. It's such a hard question because in my academic work, I lean towards plurality. That there are an infinite number of nodes, NODES, an infinite number of points of contact. But in my spiritual life, I'm very monistic. There's a monad. It's the mind of God, and all of us are within the mind of God, and we all participate in the mind of God.
Right.
There's a German theologian by the name of Wolfhard Pannenberg who has this idea called panentheism. Not pantheism, but panentheism, which is the idea that God is separate, although separate from the world. He is very much in the world. That God is in the universe, and that the universe is in God.
Yeah.
I love that.
Me too. Me too. I do love that too. And there's this whole thing. So, every time we kept saying that we are within God, I think of a lot of texts that say that God is within us. So that is pretty interesting. So now I want to come back to, consciousness and whether you think it is individualistic or collective, because I'd said that a while ago. So.
I think there is such a thing as a collective consciousness, right?
Right.
But at the same time, I think individual spiritual consciousness is also important as well. I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think once we realize that the divine can be celebrated in community, we reach into this kind of what Durkheim calls collective effervescence, this kind of sparkling spiritual social attachment of all people in a certain group together. But then private meditation is also important as well. I think we have both. And I think religious spiritual consciousness is incumbent upon both a collective participation as well as an individual participation.
Okay, and do you think, a lot of people say that God or gods are omnipresent and omniscient, but that's what someone would also say about universal or collective consciousness. So are they the same thing?
Yes and no. I would say that collective consciousness and this kind of unity of the mind of human beings together is part of a linguistic superstructure that is an endowment from God himself or from God themselves. And I would say that this gift of language is intimately tied to the history of the world.
Right.
And that this is part of a broader Weltgeist or world spirit that is animated, that's alive, right? And I think the Holy Spirit in Christianity is part of that story. Yeah.
Okay, and there's a lot of people differentiate between being God-loving and God-fearing, right? So, but my question then is, and if you're saying that God is someone who knows what they are doing, or the universe, if that's where you would place your idea of the divine, why would you, here specifically, the concept of, the traditional concept of what you would call God, whom would you refer to as God? Why do we call God, why do we fear God if God knows what they're doing? If we know that it is for good reason, right? So why do we fear? Is it because God knows what they're doing? Is it because this person is so powerful that we're scared?
I think the question of why human beings are afraid of God, I think it comes from ignorance. Now, traditionally, across the Abrahamic traditions for sure, but I think you shared with me as well that this exists in South Asian religions as well. The idea of fearing God. I think for a very long time in the vocabulary and the vernacular, to be fearful of someone meant to respect them.
Yes.
But over time, as the languages evolve, fear was associated with the notion of being afraid. And I don't think God is someone to be afraid of. Just because you wouldn't be afraid of a loving, kind-hearted father or mother figure. Right? Any kind of punishment that you receive from the divine is not meant as a mean, retributive act of punishment. It is restorative, right? And the question then becomes, how do we differentiate between the correction that comes from God and sin and catastrophe? And I think that's a hard question, that it takes a lot of discernment, it takes a lot of wisdom to figure out which is which. Sometimes we don't even know. Like, can we ever say that a natural disaster is a punishment from God? Absolutely not. There's no way to know. Yeah. And I think we need to be very careful with. There's a book of the Old Testament called the Book of Job, where a man is very close friends with God. But then the devil comes to God and says, the only reason why this man is such a close friend of yours is because he has everything. He's very wealthy. If you take away everything, he'll renounce you. And then God says, fine, I'll test Job. So Job is put through a series of tests. He loses some of his children. He loses all of his property. He has these boils on his skin that he's using pot shards to cut off. And his wife yells at him and says, renounce God, renounce God. He says, no, I will not renounce God. And then towards the end of the story, God comes, a series of friends come and start talking to Job. And they all say, some of them are saying, it's because of some sin on your part that God is punishing you, or you've done something wrong. But Job did nothing wrong, right? And so God comes back at the end of the story and starts to say, you don't know what's in my mind. Where were you when I created the massive sea creatures? Where were you when I created the earth? Where were you when I did all these things? You weren't there, so you don't know. And I think the story is a wonderful allegory for the fact that we will never know why things happen the way they do. But that the presence of the divine is there and cares for us and is very concerned with us. That doesn't answer all the questions, of course, right? But I think that outlook is part of what it means to be a storytelling animal. That there is something out there, some reason that's out there, that is cognizant of us. That's why we have language in the first place.
But do you think saying that there's reason out there comes from, when you speak of it, us being storytelling animals and saying that there is a reason out there, do you think that comes just from imagination?
I think we imagine God. Is God the product of our imagination? I don't know.
Okay.
Someone once said, if God didn't exist, we would have to invent him. I think that's true. I think if there was no God, if there was no spirituality, if there was no religion, we would have to invent it. But the fact that it's so inherent to human design, to human evolution, the fact that we are ritual creatures, that we celebrate in this way, I think it says something very interesting about our constitution.
Right. And how big of a role do you think reverence for the divine and for the supreme or something bigger, how big of a role does reverence play in acknowledging that?
I think the question comes down to, what's your relationship with the divine? Do you view the divine as a friend?
Or do you even have a relationship?
Exactly. Is there a relationship with the divine? Is it purely some intellectual abstraction for you? Or is it a real, deep, meaningful relationship? And I think for me, as it is a deep, meaningful relationship, or at least I strive to make it a deep and meaningful relationship, I think there's a real sense in which I am fulfilled. I am made whole by my participation in the mind of the divine. And I think without relationship, God becomes an overseer, a taskmaster. God becomes an arbitrary cosmic force that does whatever it wants. But once we view God in relational terms, the story changes immensely.
Right. And do you think, speaking of different stories, there's differing opinions about what kind of a world we live in, right? Before I get to, my last question, I want to understand, what do you think, do you think we live in a spirit-based world or a matter-based world?
Yes.
Which one?
Both.
Okay, could you tell me more? Because I remember you saying something about the notion of enchantment and disenchantment. And I thought
yes, absolutely. We live in a world of matter that is enchanted. The matter is inside the mind of God.
Okay.
And everything around us is vibrating with spiritual energy. I mean, even if you look at the atomic structure, if I ball my hand up in a fist, the atoms are vibrating at an incredibly fast speed. Even a solid cube, the atoms are vibrating. There is no complete situation of stasis. Something I learned recently. We used to believe that in parts of space, outer space, where there were no stars, that it was complete darkness. There was just dark matter, right? But we found something. Even in absolute darkness, there are these particles of light, subparticles called neutrinos.
Yeah.
So there is no part of the universe that is completely dark. How does the book of John in the New Testament start? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It goes on a little bit more, but it says, he was the light, and the light has not overcome, and the darkness, I messed this up. The darkness has not overcome the light is the point, right? That's beautiful to me. That the Spirit of God spoke light into existence. And even in the darkest parts of the world, the darkest parts of the cosmos, there's still light that it persists.
Interesting. And, I think that would bring me to my last question is, what is apocalyptic studies and why is it important?
Apocalyptic studies is a branch of New Testament studies that really seeks to understand the relationship of the God of the Bible with human beings. Rather than arguing that there is a natural theology, that God is everywhere known to everyone in full capacity, God has to actively reveal himself to human beings. And this act of revelation is an act of God's self-disclosure that happens in the history of every world religion. God reveals himself to people, and people accept that revelation and contemplate on it. But it's not that we go out for a search for God, that we find God. It's that God has already revealed God's self to human beings.
Right.
And on the basis of that revelation, we develop our theologies, we develop our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, our ashura, our temples, whatever. And that's what I would say apocalyptic theology is. Obviously, it has a Christian context to it as well. I can get into that later on in a different conversation, but yeah, that's what I'd like to say.
That's pretty cool. That brings us to the end of this episode. I'm just checking if I missed out on anything I wanted to check in with you. about. Oh, I think I'm good. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Oh no. Okay. I thought you'd say no. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to ask you, and maybe you can edit this out and then move it to another point in the podcast, but I was going to ask you, what do you think the role of spirituality and religion is in the 21st century?
I think it acts as an equalizer in a lot of ways. It is you acknowledge it or you don't acknowledge it. Acceptance is a very, far-fetched idea. Acceptance and also embracing it. That's a very far-fetched idea, but you acknowledge it or you don't acknowledge it. Whether or not you can sit and have a conversation about it and still be able to thrive in whatever you think is the right, whatever you think is the right environment or the right set of pieces put together for you to get to that point of your ultimate self or to be with that ultimate self, right? Whoever they are. So I think it's a great equalizer, and that's the role it plays.
Well, thank you for sharing.
I hope it was a satisfactory answer.
It was.
I know. But thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This was very insightful. And
Yeah, of course.
I